For the first time in years, there are more people looking for jobs than there are jobs available. And that is a big shift and change for employers and employees.
Yeah. So what's really going to be interesting is, what's the Fed going to do, right? Because a lot of focus for the Fed is on that federal funds rate and the quarter point here, quarter point that. But what they don't realize is now unemployment is shifting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. They've stalled the economy enough with the higher rates that it's starting to affect the job market.
Yeah. Because so what happens when unemployment goes up? Like, we should just discuss that. I think the number one is there's less leverage for the employee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because there's more people out looking for work, right? So there's more accountants, more graphic artists, more marketing people, more this, more that, right? And so what does that do? That means that your job could be gold, right?
Yeah. And, I thought it was interesting, especially for young people, and a lot of people listening can understand this, is, they would job hop like every year. Like, they get a job for 6 months, get a new job, be paid a lot more. And you couldn't blame them for doing it. It was just a job market that us that were a little older just never had seen before, because we're used to staying at our jobs, and not wanting to job hop because it doesn't look good on the resume. And you had a lot of that. And you also had people, they would get a job, and you had an assistant that did this. They started to work for us for like 3 months, and all of a sudden they wanted a 70% raise to stay on for month 4. And so, some of that stuff was pretty wild. But now, and this is going to be really hard for young people to start to wrap their head around. The rest of us, it just feels normal. But it's a hard time to find a job, and you're not going to see the wage increases that you've been seeing because there's so many applicants for every job. So that gives that employer the power again. And it also makes the employee have to really prove themselves in order to, keep their job and get promoted.
Yeah. And we're going to go over a chart in a minute here and talk about what we see in the chart. But this all shifted from about 2018. Yeah. And we'll show you this. And there's an anomaly in the middle of it during this pandemic. But the reality was, or is, I should say, the employees have they've been able to kind of control stuff personally. I know there was a time where we were trying to advertise for certain positions, and they're just really, really difficult candidates to try to find, because when the unemployment rate is low, there's not as many applicants. And to your point, the resumes that we got, people are putting 8 months here, 1 year here, 6 months here. I mean, it's on a resume. Like, that was something you would never do, or a gap, right? Like a gap between, like, well, what happened, between this year and that year? Well, I went and found myself in Costa Rica.
Yeah, we just took off for a year.
Right.
Or we did a van trip or whatever. And, a lot of people too, like, we were still hiring those people, and they would stay with us for 6 or 8 months, and then they would leave and get a better job somewhere else. And that was just the normal, but we had to hire them because there wasn't that many candidates. We might have 3 candidates on a job that we had to have filled. So you have to hire people that were job hopping. And now, what the employers are seeing is, like, we can be selective. We put up a job, we have 100 applicants within a couple of days, and we can find a great person through that.
Listen, if you own a few hundred units but can't seem to break through to thousands, I know exactly what holds you back. It's not that you can't find deals. It's not that you're not working hard enough. The problem is you're still trying to do everything yourself. And that approach that got you to a few hundred units, it's exactly the same thing that's keeping you stuck right where you are. So here's what nobody tells you. Scaling to thousands of units isn't about working harder. It's about building the right team and structure and systems. So I manage about 10,000 units and 300 people just in about 3 hours per week. And I want to show you exactly how it works. I'm opening up my boardroom for 1 day and to just 19 investors. You'll get my complete playbook, the org charts, the systems, how I raise capital, how I structure my team, everything. Plus, you get a 30-minute private call with me after I review your application. That call alone is going to be worth more than the investment. Click the link to apply below. So now let's take a look at the chart here. There's two lines. The line to the far left, if you can imagine, are the number of people unemployed, and then the one at the bottom is just merely time. And so this chart starts at 2001. But you can clearly see in the great financial crisis in 2007, when the blue line, the job opening blue line went straight down from in '07, obviously, right? Because you're going through the GFC, and then what went straight up was the red line, more people unemployed than job openings, okay? So that's clear. The GFC created this huge bubble on this chart right in the middle. Then it crossed in 2018. And that's actually when things got really interesting, because during that period of time prior to that, guys, what happened? Now, trust me, employers were not in great shape during this time either, but there's a lot of people looking for work. And so there was lots of things that went on during this period of time, but the employers kind of had their say during this period of time as well, right? Now, there's other things that matter during this period of time. There's interest rates, there's inflation, there's all that kind of stuff, and we'll get to that in a minute. But then what happened is the total job openings spiked up again in 2021. So more jobs open than people
unemployed. And it's a big difference. Like 2021, there is a lot more jobs than there are job openings.
Correct, right? And so, again, another bubble. And this was that period of time where we had, remember that employee that said, I want a 70%, I want a 70% increase after 3 months. And, he was doing a great job, but 70%, come on. And the reason is he had power out in the marketplace. And I think that's kind of the point.
Yeah, and I think you have to understand why that happened. So, right after COVID, people were home. Savings rates were at an all-time high. People were getting that stimulus money, and they didn't have anywhere to spend it because most people couldn't leave the house. So they were, just sitting there at home wondering what to do. And so employers were hiring more people to fit that need. So more people were buying online. More people were, in Phoenix, even just going out to eat more. Like, people had a lot of time on their hands because they didn't have to be in the office, and money was being spent. And I think that shows that based on how many people were being hired, because if you look at the hiring rate, it's way higher than any other time previous to that.
Yeah. So if you go to the far end of the chart here, it's basically there are 0.09 jobs for every job seeker. And that's essentially, so there's 7.8 million people unemployed, but the job openings are 7.1 million. And I think that's actually where we're headed, right?
So then, as those jobs spiked in 22, slowly since then, that line has been going down. So there's been less available jobs. And if you can also see job seekers is also ticking up. So right now, just recently, that line has crossed. And what that means is there are less jobs than there are job seekers. And as Ken had said, there are 0.9 jobs right now for every job seeker looking. Now, we haven't had that since 2018. So it's an important statistic. And you have to look at why too, right? And I think that the why is the interesting part behind it.
Yeah, and I think the first thing is that if you look at the blue line as it spikes down to 2020, there was an overhiring. Remember that? Mm-hmm. So from 2020 to call it 2022, there was a lot of hiring. Now, part of that was, post-pandemic, right? So you got to, throw a dart in that one. But there was an over-hiring during that period of time. Also rates, why are interest rates important? And I'll just give you one example. So when inflation hit 9.1%, I think it was June of 2022, the Feds started reacting with this higher rates. And so the construction, like for my industry, multifamily stopped, home building stopped. A lot of people financing stuff stopped. The whole auto purchases stopped. Anything that was being financed, obviously, or a lot of things that were being financed, pulled back. And I think that's important to understand because, on one construction project, I'll go out there, there'll be 200, 300, 400 people working at one project, right? All working in different trades. And so interest rates do have, now obviously I'm just talking about construction and I'm just talking about real estate, but low interest rates do help this a lot. And I think, it's very interesting with this buy down of the mortgage-backed securities, from the Fannie and Freddie Mac that we're starting to see that Trump's talking about, could really be interesting, because if rates go down, it could unlock a whole bunch of, new employment, right? And I would guess that low rates are going to create more employment.
Yeah, but I think we need to, look at the economy now for what it is and why this is happening, because I think a lot of people freak out when they see that there's more job seekers than there are jobs. And there's part of this that is concerning and part of this that is not concerning. And I think the biggest thing to note is that over time, there is usually more job seekers than there are jobs. That is a normal. We've been in an abnormal time the last, 6 or 7 years. This is very normal for there to be more job seekers than jobs.
Yeah, and it's going back to what you and I are used to. So once again, we were just talking offline. If you've been through this, we're actually heading back to the norm. Kind of like with interest rates, we talk a lot about. People had this interesting little run with really, really low rates. Well, that was a gift in my lifetime. I'd never seen that before. But for a lot of people, that's what it's supposed to be. So we're kind of going back to this new normal, I would think, for, unemployment and job openings. And obviously, we have to talk about immigration. We have to talk about AI. We have to talk about the overhiring during that period of time. But the fact is, the unemployment, the number of unemployed people went from a spike of 12 million to now about 7.1 million. And that is a big, big difference.
Yeah. And I think you have to understand how that changes a market. When you have more people looking than there are jobs, like we discussed, employers can be choosier. But beyond that is wage stagnation, right? Because the reason wages grow is a supply and demand. It's just like housing. Like if you have 100 people applying for one job, you don't have to necessarily pay as much as if you have 3 people looking for one job. Okay. So a lot of you at home might not have gotten any kind of raise in December. Like usually you get 3% wage growth or maybe even more. There's a lot of companies right now, because of high interest rates and because of the economy, that aren't doing that. And truthfully, because there's so many job seekers, they don't have to do that. They don't have to give you a better wage, because there's a bunch of people that are willing to take on your job right behind you. So that is a big shift from what we've seen in the last few years, when we've seen a lot of wage growth.
Yeah, so I if you guys are considering, let's say, moving positions or, for whatever reason, just understand that the job market right now is frothy. Like, there's a lot of choices that employers have, and so the employee is losing, not in every industry, but it's losing a little bit of the leverage that they've had in the past. It's shifting back toward the employer. And what does that mean? What that means is exactly what Danille just said. If we get 50 to 100 applicants for a position, which is, by the way, what we are getting, that's not a guess. We have lots of choices, right? And with that, we typically, we got more candidates, which oftentimes means sometimes we can get better candidates and for better pricing, because we have so many options. If I have 2 or 3 or 4 options for a position, obviously that gives me more leverage, and that's where we're heading now. So if you're in an industry and you've been there a while, before, make sure, like, before people could leave, and they could leave for Costa Rica and then come back and just go be absorbed right back into the economy. I think that's changing now. I don't think that, unless you really have something solid, I do think that, I'm speaking from an employee standpoint, you got to make sure you have something solid before you make a move.
And the other thing I want to address too is the work from home. So we saw a big spike in work from home due to COVID, but also due to not having enough employees for a job. So, we had to make our workforce more appealing and offer remote positions or work from home positions or flex positions, because, like I said, you have 2 or 3 candidates, you need to be a strong competitor. We're seeing remote work kind of being taken off the table. Full-time remote work is still really hard to find, where it wasn't a few years ago. And now even flex positions, a lot of companies are pulling their workers back into the office. And the reason they're doing that is because employers never wanted their workers outside of the office. That was never something that most employers wanted. but they had to do it because of the supply and the demand. But now that the employer is back in control, you're going to see more full-time office work. And you're seeing that in a lot of big companies right now.
Yeah, and so it's making its way through, as you can say. The other thing is, more and more people are getting into debt, and this buy now, pay later, and all of that stuff is a big piece. And so, I'm specifically talking more about housing now, of course, but not just housing, but just as an employee, your costs are going up, and I think inflation has crept through, and your wage growth has probably not kept up as it relates to inflation. And so there's even more risks moving forward because nobody knows, where inflation is headed. The last thing we want is let's call it 2, 3, even 4% inflation, and a really frothy job market where there's not a lot of options, because these costs. We don't see a big adjustment in any of these costs. How about you? Do you see those coming?
No, I don't see inflation going down. One of the bigger things that I would be concerned about is, people are having trouble absorbing this inflation at their current levels, and wages, while inflation did rise, so did wages. If we start to see a deflation in wages, I don't think we're necessarily going to see a deflation in the inflation that has happened over the last few years. So that is going to, make it harder to live, on the amount of money that you're making. And I think that hits the next point that is more concerning. So, like we had said before, having more people looking for jobs than jobs is pretty normal, even though it hasn't been for the last few years. But what we're seeing now that's a little bit abnormal is we have job seekers being added to the workforce at kind of a record number. And then we have those amount of jobs going down. So you have to wonder why these people are coming off of the shelf and starting to look for a job. And I think a lot of it plays into this inflation and then the deflation on the wage of perhaps the other spouse.
Yeah, well, that's that labor participation rate. As we talk about this, and what does that mean? It literally means what it says. It's labor participation. That actually has been declining for years and years and years. And I would imagine that with this shift, you're going to start to see it climb back up again. And to your point,
well, you already are. Yeah.
Yeah. The money just. It was a really interesting 10-year period we had, where I think people just left and then they jumped back in whenever they wanted. It's almost like a treadmill or I can jump on it any time and be fine. I'll live off of what I can. But I think those days are gone.
Well, and I think too, you're missing a big piece too, because I think there's a lot of stay-at-home parents that are coming off the shelf. So, a husband and wife, maybe the husband works, the wife stays home with the kids. That was always the plan. But now things are tight and maybe the kids are in school. So she's realizing, now I need to go to a full-time job. And like Jerry had said earlier, maybe before it was side hustles here and there, but now with this inflation, or maybe their partner lost their job or had to take a pay decrease, they're having more hard time catching up. So then that brings somebody else off the shelf. So while I do think in COVID, it was kind of a different cycle where people would just take off for a year and go do a trip, I think now it's more structurally what is financially making sense.
Yeah, and I think this is really coming after the white collar more than anything, that middle management. The AI is creeping up. Like we've talked a lot about the paralegals, the lawyers, and the CPAs and things that can be automated, bookkeeping and that kind of stuff. But one of the areas that I think is going to really continue to be strong moving forward is the blue collar side of things. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, the trades. Obviously they'll really get going when interest rates go down even more, right? Because that's what kind of sparks it. That's the match that lights the fuse. Are lower rates, because then people start building and all that kind of stuff. But that is a very undersupplied piece. And what's happened, and I mean, I can just speak, personally, back when I was in high school. I would say less than 10% of my high school actually went to college, and the rest all went into the trades. And of course, I'm quite a bit older, but the reality is that's really shifted, right? The colleges have looked at these high schools as their ticket, right? And we can go down a rabbit hole here, but the point is as a result, the point I'm trying to make is those trades, people that they've now gone into college and they've gotten these degrees and they're in the workforce and it's oversupplied. Call it the white collar piece. I think the white collar piece is a little bit in a bubble personally, and the blue collar is not. So it's not all one industry. And I think you were talking about earlier, was it tech? Tech has pulled back. What was some? There was some.
Well, there's different reasons different industries are getting hit, right? And the tech industry obviously is getting hit with AI. And the construction real estate industry is getting hit with those higher rates, whereas retail is more consumer sentiment. But everything's kind of hitting different parts of the economy for different reasons, all at the same time. And one of the concerning things on this factor is that unemployment is steadily rising. Like I said, part of that is employers pulling back. Part of that is more people wanting a job that pulling, them off the bench. And that combined is creating, unemployment rate to rise pretty quickly. And we haven't seen that since '08. So that now, of course, in '08, it continued to go up. So what we're going to be watching here is, does the unemployment continue to spike, or is this just a small shift that's kind of getting us back to that normal? Because we are still under unemployment rates that we had in 2019. So we're still under those rates. But the more concerning part is how quickly the unemployment rate is going up.
Yeah. And the unemployment rate, to your point, is actually historically low.
Mm-hmm.
But the job seekers, that's the big issue.
Right? Well, that's creating a higher unemployment rate, right? So you have two things happening at the same time that are now spiking the unemployment rate, which is important because that is a distinction from '07. '08. '08, I don't think more people were getting, at a significant number off the bench to get a job. I think that was just companies laying off workers. Where now this spike has two things happening at the same time. But it does show that the consumer is under stress because a lot of these stay-at-home moms and stay-at-home dads, they don't come and get a job unless they need one financially for their family. So I do think it shows distress in the economy.
I agree. And the consumer is under stress for a very different scenario than was going on in 2008. I think that's kind of the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's different. And it's not, as of right now, it's not something that's significant, but the unemployment number is something we're watching because if an unemployment number continues to go up, then that creates distress in the housing market and in the economy in general.
Yeah. And so if I were in your shoes, focus on your cash reserves, focus on minimal turnover or whatever that might mean to you. Look for ways to maximize, your cost of funds, whatever that might be. If you're in some kind of really high interest rate on credit card or perhaps some kind of hard money loan or any of those kinds of things, anything that's going to be taking away from you, because we are heading into a time frame where I think you're not going to see the wage growth. You're not going to see, quite a bit, unless, of course, we start to see this inflation from this bond buying that Fannie and Freddie are doing, or the mortgage-backed securities, I should say, and then on the Fed side, which is monetary policy, Trump's negotiating with, I would call it housing policy. Two very different scenarios going on, but it's going to be really, really interesting to watch. And low rates could actually help the employment market.